Hello ladies of YouTube, welcome to part 2 of our opening repertoire series, and in this video we're going to be just looking at what to do against the move 1d4. So as you may have seen already in the introduction, and if you haven't seen the introduction, do look in a few of my videos. We already discussed the ideas and the advantages of playing this 1e6 repertoire. So we'll be going into quite often either Queen's Gambit Declined positions or into French positions. If you want a bit more information, or you haven't seen that video, do check that out. I will link a video in the description in regards to that. Okay, so against 1d4 we're going to be going into a simple, easy way of developing with 1e6, d5, knight to f6 and bishop to e7. So these are, and finally castling as well. So these 5 moves will be the basis of our quick and easy opening repertoire. We can play this against pretty much any white response, and we get a nice solid game and a nice easy starting position to play with. Okay, so after d4, typically we'll see c4. As I discussed in the introduction video, they can play e4 as well. And this will go into a French, but we'll discuss that in another video. Today's focus is just looking at what we'll do against 1d4. So let's just go into this position. And a safe move, it holds onto the pawn, it controls the e4 square, and a lot of the battle here for black, it will be how he can control this e4 square and not let white get the ideal pawn center with e4. So his whole battle will really revolve around this square here and getting his pieces developed to the appropriate squares where they'll be controlling this square. Okay, so knight c3, and this will be a typical move that white will play. He has other options. They will tend to transpose into the same things. He could play maybe knight to f3 first, maybe e3 first as well. So those are the options here, but typically he'll play knight to c3, and it makes logical sense. It puts pressure on the d5 square. It gets ready to play e4 as well, potentially in the future. Knight to f6. So black here has developed a piece offering extra support to d4, the d pawn, and also challenging white's control of the center over e4. Now notice here actually these two moves have a lot of purpose to them. They're very flexible moves, which is why you tend to see these very often. Simply because they do many things. They're not just developing, they're controlling key squares, they're controlling defending key points as well, or attacking key points in the position. Bishop to g5 now, and what this move does, and why it's so often played, is it pins this f6 knight, and it's also threatening, just a simple threat of just capturing on this this knight on f6. So let's say if black makes a mistake of playing h6 now, well he'll suddenly find that he's not going to do very well in this position, as after the capture here, black has 2 options that really aren't favourable in any way. If he captures with the queen, now you'll notice that this has relinquished the defense on d5, and after a couple of exchanges you'll see here now that white is up a clear pawn and is also getting a tempo of the queen by attacking the queen. So really white is doing really well in this position. And the other move, g takes on f6, also doesn't work, as really white can have a nice safe position here. He knows that black's position is a little bit all jagged now. His pawns are all doubled on the king's side, and black's going to have a difficult time getting his king into a safe position. If he tries to castle kingside, he'll see that his king is very exposed, and yeah, it's just not a great position for black. These pawns later on will become targets for white to exploit later in the game, and not particularly what he wants out of the opening. So that's why black needs to play this move e7. So this move does 2 things. Firstly, it breaks the pin that was created by the bishop against the knight, but it also defends this pawn would you believe it? So this queen is now offering support on the d5 square. It no longer needs to worry about potential captures here on f6, which would have previously been a threat, as now the bishop will capture on f6, and black's doing very well here. White's given up the bishop pair, which is arguably positionally better because the bishops offer a bit more I guess I could say it should control and can move faster than the knights. So typically the bishop pair tends to be slightly better than the knights, but also now it's still defending. Black is still defending the key squares in this position, so black's doing quite well here. White hasn't really achieved much in that capture. In fact, he's got this bishop now onto an even more active square. Okay, so going back then, so what White will do instead is he'll continue typically in his own classical development if he wanted to, and really I would say just very quickly, I mean, it doesn't really, whatever your opponent plays here, you know, we'll still get into sort of our typical opening development here. So typically White will play e6, or he could play knight to f3. Both moves are very playable. So e3, the idea of this is the bishop coming to d3. Black will castle, and as you can see here, Black in 5 moves, Black's been very economical with his development. He's just focused on getting his king side developed. He's created a strong central position that's very difficult for White to break down, and he's got his king safe. And with this little 5 moves, we have essentially got into our main position that we can play however we want now in Blitz. However, if you do want to continue further, please do have a look at the next few positions I'm going to look at in the tartakower variation. So let's just have a recap though just before we go into it. So after d4, we play e6, d5, and then we're going to play knight to f3, bishop to e7, and castles. Do apologise, it's going to look like I'm playing d5. It's just the problem with my my opening system here. So it's a transposition, but it's the same thing. So f6, after this move, defend with the bishop, and then typical castle. So just learn these 5 moves. And as I say, it doesn't really matter too much what White plays here. We will get into the same scheme of development. Okay, so knight to f3. So with this move, White is defending a few more key squares. Holding, or putting a bit of pressure onto the e5 square where he could potentially jump in, and just getting one move closer to castling. So this is a pretty good move for White. h6. Now this is a really useful move by Black. The purpose of that is to give his king just a little bit of room, breathing space in the future, but also it gains a tempo on this bishop. Again, it would be a mistake for the bishop to capture here, as this gives Black too much here. It gives him the bishop pair, and actually this bishop is probably a bit more active on this square than on e7. So bishop to h4 will be played, and now here Black has 2 options that he can play. He can play the b6, which is the tartakower, which we'll go into in a minute. He could also play, just very quickly, knight to e4 here. This is known as the lasker variation, a very interesting variation if you want to go into very calmer positions, less theoretically challenging, but still very popular for Black. It's very difficult for White to have any advantage in this position, as what it tends to do is it now forces the exchange of 2 minor pieces. So after bishop takes on e7, queen takes on e7, here White has 2 options. He can capture the knight or the pawn. Typically he'll capture with the knight, and here, although it looks like Black's got these horrible double pawns here, he can hold this position quite comfortably with f5, and you can see here now Black has achieved his goal that I stated earlier on in the video. He's got his e4 square. He will now just look to develop his pieces out and get a comfortable position there. If he captures on c5, which is also very popular, what Black will typically do is capture this knight, and after a few exchanges, again this is also very popular. You know, you can see here, okay, White's got a little bit more freer development here, but black is also going to get comfortable development as well. So a nice popular little sideline now. I never really thought too much of the lasker variation just due to the fact I don't think it really offers a great deal for black. It probably neutralizes and probably makes the position quite equal, but otherwise I've never really been a huge fan of playing the lasker variation. So instead of that, I'm going to advocate for the move b6. So this is the first key move of our system. You know, the other moves that we looked at were sort of preparing for this, and what we're really trying to achieve is getting this this bishop onto a good square. You may have noticed in the introduction video I discussed the fact that playing this move e6 really hampers this bishop from developing properly. So what black is here now going to try and do is get this this poor piece onto the b7 diagonal, where it will have a lot of influence on this a8 to h1 diagonal. So black will typically follow up by playing bishop to b7, knight to d7, and then c5. A position which will give him a lot of dynamic chances, a lot of play on the queen side. So bishop d3, bishop b7, castles, and the reason why white's going to play these moves is obviously he wants to develop. He's now one step closer to castling. b7 castles. Now the white king is now safe. Bishop to b to d7, and here white has a number of moves, but quite popular is rook to c1, so putting a bit of pressure on the c file. That will become open. That will be really where the main breaks will occur. c5, and now we reach a kind of crossroads here. So white, if he wants to, can maintain the pressure, or I should say maintain the tension in the position by not exchanging, but if he wants to, he can exchange both pawns off here. So after maybe c takes on d5, oh sorry, I do apologize, wrong way. After maybe c takes, e takes, and then after d takes, b takes, we reach this typical hanging pawn position. So white will hope that the pawns will become targets in the future, but black is defending his pawns very strongly now, and he can make use of quite a lot of the advantages from this dynamic position. So he gains more territory, he has control over quite a lot of key squares. As you can see, I've highlighted quite all the space that he's gained from white. He's got play on the open B file and the E file. You know, and these can be very useful squares for his rooks. The E4 square is very good for him. He can use that for a nice outpost later in the game. And what's even more important as well is later in the position he'll be potentially wanting to play this D5, D4 advance, which will not only create a pass pawn, but it will unleash this bishop on B7. So if, let's say, you know, A3 is played, we could play D5, and I'm not saying that black will play this, but you can see here, okay, black gets this isolated pawn, which can still become a target, but it's a pass pawn. That can potentially be a great thing in the future. But he's also got his bishop coming down this. Now, obviously, I wouldn't advocate playing this straight away, as obviously now you can see this this pawn can be captured. But I'm just saying, typically, I'm just showing you roughly what the position will look like if these two pawns will be exchanged off at some point in the future. Alright, so that's really the main idea. So let's go quickly back to the start. So I'll recap again. So we want to do the first 5 moves. I'll pretty much autopilot, and now we want to play the key move h6, and then we've got 2 main moves that we've discussed: e4, lasker defense, which exchanges off a few pieces, or we could play b6, and we follow this simple system of development: bishop going to b7, knight to b to d2, and c5. And then after we did play those moves, we can typically get into this hanging pawn position. So black will get all the territory, all the dynamic chances, but white has potential targets that he can focus fire on. So it's up to black to be able to defend this position and then consolidate on his advantage later on in the game. So it's quite nice and balanced to work with. Alright, so that's a tartakower variation, so a really popular way for black to play. I now want to focus my attention on something known as the Carlsbad system. I'm going to flip the board here just for a moment to black, and again we'll get into the same position. Once again, I've shown d5 for instead of e6, but I do advocate playing e6 first. So we've got the same position, but the main difference here and the main key move that will change the structure completely, even whether you go into a tartakower or into this system, is this move here. So c takes on d5, and it looks like a bit of a funny move. So what is white achieving with this move? So by exchanging on d5, white creates a small imbalance for creating a 2-to-1 pawn majority in the center. However, he's done so with a drawback of potentially freeing the bishop on c8 to c3. Now, will that latter factor be so important? Well, we'll find out in this position, as sometimes this white bishop can be a bit difficult to develop properly, as we'll find out later in the game. Bishop g5 again will be played, so very similar to the position we looked at, and once again we want to be playing bishop to e7. Again, if we don't, if we play, let's say, h6, this is going to again be a mistake. The bishop can capture, queen can capture, and again the knight will be attacking the queen. It's captured a pawn. It's not a good position for black whatsoever. So going back then, bishop e7. Okay, so now that threat's gone. You know, the queen is now defending this pawn. It's all fine. e3. And again, we're going to just castle away. So we've pretty much followed the same system of development that we did, except that the difference being that there's no c pawn on c4 and there's no pawn on e6. So pretty much the same form of development. Now, after knight to f3, which is typically played, or sometimes you'll see bishop here and knight coming here. These are also very popular. After knight to f3, you've got to be very careful here as black. If we think we can get this bishop safely developed to f5, then we've got a bit of a shock in store, as now white can play a fantastic move, which is bishop to queen to b3. And the purpose of this move is it has a double attack on both the d5 square and also the b7 square. If, let's say, he tries to defend one of these, then we have this few exchanges, and here white is up a clear pawn, and has got a clear advantage in this position. So definitely not good for black. Okay, so going back then, so we definitely don't want to play f5 straight away. So a move we need to make sure we play first is c6, and this is a real key move, since we argue here that black doesn't need to play the bishop to b7 anymore. That ship's kind of sailed now. It's got its own open diagonal. It doesn't need to open up another diagonal for the bishop. This move also defends the d5 square, but it also, would you believe it, defends the b7 square, as if the queen, let's say, came to here, we could potentially maybe at some point maybe play the queen here or something, or I don't know. In fact, that wouldn't really be very good, but the pawn is still defended, so it's not any risk here for us if the queen comes here. In fact, actually, we could play moves like b6. That'll work. So the queen come into b6, and we don't have to worry so much about this exchange, as now we just get an open file here. So this is quite good for black. Okay, so anyway, going back, so c6, really key move here. So now bishop comes to d3. So again, following the same line of development. And here we're going to play the knight b to d7, and the purpose of this move is we're going to look to reroute this knight to f8, and at some point also play it to g6. And the purpose of this is we want to try and stop this potential plan by black of getting his queen to c7, c2, and then creating this huge amount of pressure on this h7 square. So after castles, rook to e8, queen to c2, knight to f8, and then maybe rook a to b1. So maybe playing for this attack along here, so this minority attack, exchanging off this pawn here and creating some pawn weaknesses in the position. We can pretty much stop here. I mean, we'll get maybe the knights come to g6, but you can see here black has a very playable position. He's got most of his pieces developed. He'll at some point get this bishop out, where it will have some influence on the game. He's got this nice e-file here that he can play along with his rook. He also he will need to soak up a bit of the pressure along here that he'll soon face with moves like b4 and a4. I play moves like maybe a5 or a6 to try and soak that up a little bit. But you can see it's a very playable position, you know, and it's nothing. I don't think it's anything too dangerous for black to face in these positions, and it's quite easy. As I say, it's quite easy to get into. So to recap, we'll go through the main lines again. So obviously there's the exchange, and here we don't need to worry too much. Again, we follow sort of simple line of development. We want a bishop to e7, we castle again, and the only difference, as I say, is just these pawns are not here. That's the only difference. The key move that we have to play, c6, very key move here, defends this pawn structure here. And now we want to play for this this knight maneuver, to getting the knight to f8 to g6, where it will control a lot of squares for black. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video. So as I say, this will just be a basic one, just to look at the easy setup that you'll have against the Queen's Gambit Declined. I will just quickly say, I mean, you might face sort of c4, in which case you play sort of again e6, and this will typically transpose back into a Queen's Gambit. One other line you might want to look at, obviously, if the knight's f3, e6, we can typically go back into the same system with d4, and we reach a similar position, almost like a transposition, I should say, to what we had. I'll just quickly go for a couple more moves. You'll see here this is incredibly similar to what we had earlier. In fact, this will be a transposition. One line you'll need to maybe do a little bit of study on and maybe have a look at a bit more is what to do against potential moves like after maybe this, knight here, and then g3, and these will be the Catalan structures that you might face as well. This can be a little bit difficult. I won't really cover this too much in this video, as whilst they do come up quite a bit, I don't think black needs to worry a huge amount against these positions. I typically like to play for c6 first and then play bishop e7, so we're still getting into the similar lines of development. The key difference here is this bishop is clearly controlling this diagonal. This bishop will have a little bit of a struggle to get out later on, but we'll look to maybe play these e5 pushes in the future, and maybe keep this bishop here just in the short term, and then in the long term get it out later on. So I'll just show you a few little lines here. Yeah, I mean, you could play b6 here. That's not a bad option. Maybe get the bishop to b7, potentially even to a6 wouldn't be too bad either. So there are some interesting stuff there as well. I would say look at that in your own time. But as I say, we've covered quite a lot of ground here with both the tartakower and also the Carlsbad structure as well. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed this video. As I say, I'll make the next video. I'll look at sort of the French, some of the lines in that. The lines in the French tend to be a lot more open. There tends to be a lot more things going on in those positions than we've looked at here today. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you guys soon.